few things that I think you need to know in order to do this paper successfully, as well as to talk a bit about um, the process by which you should probably go through in doing your paper. First off, I've posted on under content um, some examples of papers that have gotten A's from me in the past from courses I've taught at UMUC in the past. There are three samples of different kinds of papers, basically a research paper on a small scale, a paper that's more of a combination of summary and analysis, and a straight term paper, and an actual term paper, to give you some idea of what it is that um, it takes to get an A. The quality of writing counts, to be sure, but you don't have to be a great writer to earn an A on a term paper. You do, however, have to do an introduction and a thesis statement and follow directions and provide citations and references along the way. Um, so I want to make sure that that's clear. But look at those samples first. I mean, don't just look at them, just scan them for a few minutes and go, oh, that's pretty good, and that's it. Really look at them and try to figure out, well, what is this student trying to do here? What question are they trying to answer? How balanced is it in terms of talking about stuff that they agree with as well as stuff that they actually don't agree with? What kind of evidence do they provide? How many examples do they provide throughout their paper? Do they provide a citation at the end of every paragraph? Is it in a proper format? Do they have references at the end of the paper? Do they have a thesis statement or argument that they start off with right from the first paragraph and follow through with throughout their paper? Those are the kinds of things that you need to consider in writing a term paper, a research paper, really any paper for any humanities or social sciences course, especially a history course. Now, there are 5 things that I want to make sure that you do in the process of putting together your term paper for History 461. And these are not in any particular order, but they're all important. You need to write an introduction. You need to write an introduction that covers all aspects of the question being asked, meaning that it's not enough to say if it happens to have if the question happens to be to name 3 of X and pick which one that you think is the most important and which one's the most significant, which one has the most historical context to in terms of examples. Yes, you're supposed to pick one, but you don't pick one without talking about the other 2. That doesn't mean you spend equal time talking about the other 2. It doesn't have to be a 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3, but you need to cover all 3, which means you have to explain why you picked one and why you didn't pick the other 2. What were the weaknesses in the other 2 for why you didn't pick those 2, just as an example. So it's not just it's not this it's not as straightforward as simply name and say this one and that's it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a paper. It would just be you making a couple of statements. So you want to write an introduction that really covers all aspects of a particular question. The why aspect of the question, the different pieces and different topics and different people that are involved in the question, and most importantly, why your argument will hold the most water. Now you can write, I'm one of those professors that don't really care whether you write in first or third person for your introduction. If you want to say, I will argue or I intend to argue X, Y, and Z as your argument, that's fine. If you say this paper will show that that this one thing is more important than the other 2 because, and you give your couple of reasons for why that because is right, then that's as good an argument as any way of putting together your argument as any. What I want you to do is make sure you address the question directly and fully, but don't go into extraneous detail. Don't try to provide evidence right from the first paragraph. You need to do that after the introduction. Nor do I want you to go off in terms of irrelevancies. Starting off sentences like this: African Americans have always been victims of Jim Crow. Well, that's not true, because Jim Crow hasn't always existed, and African Americans are more than the sum of being victims in terms of people. We're all human beings. We're at some point in time or another victims of something, but we're also can be heroes in our own lives as well, actors in our own lives, and that's what this course is designed to do. Those kinds of sentences are what I call throwaway sentences. Well, not just me, but a lot of people in the field call throwaway sentences because they don't really add anything and they don't actually address the question. So you want to provide context that's relevant to the question that you are being asked, that you are answering, not just provide, not just to just sort of fill in. So basically, you want to make sure that everything you write serves the purpose of addressing the question and making the points that you want to make right from the introduction on. That's one. Two is, I can't emphasize this enough, put your name on your paper, not just in the file that you send me or upload to Leah, but actually on the paper. I don't want cover pages, as it already says in the syllabus, as I already say on the term paper assignment document that's also under content, but and under assignments actually as well. But what I want from you is a heading at the top of the first page where you put the history 461, your name, the date in which you're doing the paper, and the question that you're addressing. I prefer if you don't actually put the question in the paper, but if you do, make it single space, make it part of your heading, and then go straight to your introduction on the same page. Do not create a separate page just for the heading. Don't want any cover pages. There's sometimes students think that if they have a cover page that counts as one page towards the 4 or 5 or 6 pages that they're planning on writing. It doesn't count. I don't count it that way. So what's the point of having a cover page if I'm not counting that way? So please, no cover pages. Please put your name on your paper. It'll be, I'm always amazed by the number of students who forget to do something as basic as put their name down. So that's kind of important. 3, in terms of what I'm looking for the paper assignments and so on and so forth, is evidence. Not just evidence based on examples that are relevant from a historical perspective, meaning that you don't go off on tangents talking about things that are outside the time period of the question, meaning that you use the sources, your first sources that you should be using for a term paper, not a research paper, but for a term paper, should be your textbook and other books that are required for this course or supplemental for this course, or I shouldn't say and the lecture notes, because there's a lot of information in those lecture notes. Most of you should be able to pull around a B on this paper as a minimum standard, and in order to do that, those required readings should help you get most, if not the entire way, towards that B, if not toward an A. So please make use of those pieces of required text, required readings, and putting together your paper, and pull examples from them. Just to give you one example, if you were writing a paper strictly about what evidence is there that Jim Crow had an adverse effect on black businesses, you could cite race riots in places like Memphis, Tennessee in 1892, in New Orleans somewhere in the 1890s as well, Houston in 1906, Atlanta in 1908, ultimately Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921 as examples of how whites used race riots to destroy black businesses, just as an example. And that's your evidence. Those examples provide the framework for the evidence that shows the impact of race riots and Jim Crow on black businesses during the period between roughly, say, 1880 and 1922 or 1925, depending on how you're looking at it. And is, of course, one of the push factors for black migration from the South, from the rural South to the urban North and Midwest, and in some cases to places like Atlanta and Richmond, Virginia, and Charlotte, North Carolina, and then pulling it back, Washington, D.C. So those are the kinds of things that you really need to think through in terms of putting your paper together. It's not just you just writing for writing's sake. You want to make sure that you use those examples to really prove whatever point that you're trying to prove, or really show that you have a point that's worth proving. So please do that. And in the process of doing that, number four is that you need to cite your sources. It's not just for the purposes of this course, and for the purposes of how I teach this course, not to mention what UMUC wants. You need to use Chicago-style format for citations, but not just any form of Chicago-style format, but the format that they're adopting in the field these days, which is in-text parenthetical citations. There's a document called Citations and References, cheat sheet or document under content, which it's an 8-page document where I go into detail about how to do citations in text and parenthetical, meaning that it's within the actual text or body of the essay that you're writing, preferably at the end of each paragraph, where you cite one or more sources. If it's say a text, if it's the textbook Hine, Hammond, the year 2012 or 2013, and then the page number. You need to actually list the page numbers from which you're pulling from the book. Don't just list the names of the authors and the year of publication, but you also need the page numbers as well. I provide American Psychological Association style format as well as an option for those of you who know APA format, because it's very similar to what Chicago Styles adopted. In fact, Chicago Styles' newest version of citations is pretty much based on what APA is already doing. So use that format. I do not want to see footnotes. I do not want to see endnotes. I don't want you to see you use references as endnotes or footnotes, because they're not the same thing. And I do not want you using any other format other than what I prescribe for you to use in this course through the citations and references sheet. If you do that, I will note that. I might even take points off for that if the formatting's so far off that I can't tell what you're doing. Okay, just so that you know that. And then then with references, it doesn't have to be a lot of references. Please don't use lots of outside sources, and please do not start using all kinds of sources from the web, because sources from the web tend to not be. The sources from the web probably aren't specific enough to answer any of the questions that you have listed for the term paper assignment to do. So if you do use an external source, it needs to be very specific to the topic question that you are trying to address, not just some general source referencing the Great Migration or the Harlem Renaissance or the Great Depression. So please, if you are going to use an outside source, be very judicious and very specific about it. Don't just pick any old website or Wikipedia or answers.com or answers.yahoo.com for references. These are, to be honest with you, they're terrible. They're terrible places to go for sources, for direct sources. They might be able to help you find a specific source if you were doing a research paper, but they in and of themselves aren't good sources for this kind of work. So that's number 4. And the number 5, write a conclusion. It's not enough to write an introduction with an argument. You need to conclude that argument with information about basically summarizing what you wrote in your paper, and then amplifying it to say that for all of these reasons, for all of these reasons, it's fairly obvious, say, for instance, that white violence is a main driver that destroyed black businesses and black wealth, but it was also a main driver toward black migration. You can make some sort of argument like that if we're talking specifically about white violence, Jim Crow, and black businesses, just as a for instance. So please end your paper as well as you begin your paper. So those are the main things that my expectations, what I'm looking for in your paper, what I'm looking for out of each and every single one of you. So those are the things I want you to concentrate on. But I want to reiterate a point, and it's kind of goes along the lines of what we've been doing in the discussion the last 3 weeks, because the discussion is actually a small form version of what you actually have to do in all of your writing. Make your point, make your argument, show some examples, show some knowledge of what you actually have picked up from the readings, and so on and so forth. That is this. Term papers, final exams that are essay-based, all these kinds of things are not based on your opinion. They're based on the evidence that you can provide. You may have a bias that says that I believe X, Y, and Z, but if you don't have any proof for it, then really, the opinion really doesn't matter. It's all about what you can show, what you can prove, the evidence that you can provide in order to prove or show what it is that you're trying to show in answering a question or in addressing a particular topic for your essay. So please, by all means, do not rely solely on your own personal opinion or bias in order to not only answer questions in discussion, but for a term paper. And I've seen too many students too often that get so caught up in trying to prove what they actually personally believe that they forget it's all about what they can prove. Oftentimes, you might end up writing something that you completely disagree with personally, but the evidence goes in that direction. And, being a good student means that you go in the direction where the evidence takes you and not what your opinion is all about. Okay? So I just want to make sure that that is clear too. If you have any questions, please email me at donald.collins@faculty.umc.edu. Please ask me questions. If for some reason you feel like you need to give you a quick feedback on your paper before it's actually due next week, contact me about it first. Don't just send me the paper and expect me to basically edit the heck out of it so that basically I've done half the work for you. I'm willing to take a look at some papers if people just want to know if they're going on the right track, but don't expect me to give you an extensive feedback before you've actually done your paper, your term paper. So I wish everyone well. And again, if you have further questions, please email me. We'll certainly have more time to talk about this, virtually speaking, and through Leo over the course of the next week and a half, 12 days.